killed him. I killed that boy.
And I'm just out of school, like I'm real cool. I got the jump, got the jive, got the message up alive. I'm a wild one, I'm a wild one. Ooh, yeah, I'm a wild one. I'm gonna keep it shaking, I'm gonna keep it moving, baby. Don't you grab my style, I'm a real wild child. Come on, baby, shake all night long.
You know, when I finished watching this film, I only had two things on my mind. Francis Ford Coppola and making a movie pill with you, Mr. Molotov. How you doing today, sir?
It's about bloody time, man. It's been a dog's age since we've done this. I'm doing all right. I'm staying alive, digging holes, falling into them, all the fun stuff.
Well, this is the movie pill, and this is quite an interesting one that we've got lined up here today. It all starts many years ago, doesn't it? When two young men separated by an ocean were sitting in school and they were reading but one novel. And it was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, I believe.
Yeah, this story, I think a lot of young people are of our generation at least are introduced to it through middle school reading class, maybe grade 7 or 8. A teacher will give it to you and tell you to read it, and it's a great book, especially for young men. And it's the sort of thing that a young person could sort of fall in love with from a literary perspective. It doesn't. It is young adult literature. In fact, I think this book is credited with actually sort of giving birth to the young adult genre, but it doesn't talk down to the reader.
Well, it was written by a teenager, really. It was written by S.E. Hinton when she was a junior in Will Rogers High School in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I think the first time I saw this film, it was on TV on like a Saturday night, and I think I missed the first like half an hour of it. So I came into it right around the inciting incident. I would have been maybe like 10 years old at the time, and I think I was thinking, wow, this is a gritty story.
I actually remember seeing the film in school because my English teacher used to she would give us a book to read, and if there was a film adaptation, she would actually show us the film in question. In fact, like she showed us a lot of movies. I think the first time I ever saw the movie Highlander was actually because of that particular teacher. I actually didn't realize it was even a Francis Ford Coppola movie until maybe a few years ago. I guess we'll get into how the film actually came about, because it came about in a fairly interesting way. Francis Ford Coppola actually got a letter from a bunch of students from a school in Fresno, California. And it was basically them just saying, like, yeah, we love this book. Could you please adapt this book into a movie, Mr. Coppola? And Francis Ford Coppola has since said that he has a rule where he has to do pretty much anything a child asks him to do. So he went ahead and read the book. He got a hold of S.E. Hinton, the author of the novel. She says to him, "I've got a bit of a problem with you making this movie." And Coppola apparently gets really kind of defensive. He's like, "Oh, what's that?" And she says to him, well, The Godfather was better than the book, and The Black Stallion, which is a movie that he produced, was better than the book. Are you going to do that to my book as well?"
Francis Ford Coppola, in particular, back in the 70s and 80s, was certainly something of a director who was known for getting involved in very difficult projects. The Godfather was an incredibly difficult and fascinating shoot. And of course, everyone knows what happened with Apocalypse Now. So, I mean, I imagine that, at this point in his career, Coppola was probably thinking, well, he wants to direct perhaps a prestige picture, something that will be Oscar worthy, but also won't be a particularly expensive or difficult or, logistically challenging film to adapt. And The Outsiders really sort of has all of those elements in spade.
The book actually is actually quite well suited to being adapted into a movie. You can tell that S.E. Hinton herself was already very into the movies. She had already had some of her works adapted. I mean, prior to this, there was a film called Tex, which had Matt Dillon in it, who's in this film, and that was adapted from one of her books. It probably would have been a fairly simple question of adapting it, really, because from what I can tell, they basically just took large swaths of the book and just transferred it to screenplay format, and that was it.
And of course, so much of what makes this film work is the fact that it probably has the most incredible and iconic cast from a 1980s film. I mean, we have as our lead, we have C. Thomas Howell, who
Yeah.
is a bit of a lesser known name these days, but he starred in Red Dawn the year after this in 1984. He was in The Hitcher. Of course, we have Patrick Swayze, we have Rob Lowe, we have Emilio Estevez in a standout performance. We have Tom Cruise in what I believe is one of his first roles, although maybe Tapped
Yeah.
was his first. And then, of course, we have the great Ralph Macchio, the
Yes.
Karate Kid himself, and the incomparable Matt Dillon in probably his most Matt Dillonist role.
Oh yes, Matt Dillon kills it in this movie.
You know, he just oozes charisma. He's the type of guy that, you know, if you were on the wrong side of the tracks back in 1965 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like you'd want to be hanging out with Dallas Winston.
Yeah, he's the rebel without a cause. He's he's going to cause a ruckus for no good reason, like you said in Streets of Fire. And speaking of Streets of Fire, we also have Diane Lane in this film as Cherry Valance.
It takes an interesting approach with her because she's not really a love interest. She's not a damsel in distress character. She does factor into the inciting incident of the film. She's just a generally impressive character, and she's a good foil for Ponyboy. They have a couple of scenes of dialogue together where she really does sort of function as an audience surrogate, as Ponyboy explains more of what their lives are like to somebody on the outside. And then, of course, Leif Garrett's in the film as well, in a role that I think gets overlooked a lot.
Francis Coppola basically turned everyone into method actors for this film. He had, like, all the boys just sort of living in what would become the Curtis household for ages, just, like, being constantly in character. Coppola actually tried to get Matt Dillon to spend a night in jail, and Matt Dillon was like, fuck that, you spend a night in jail. You've got, well, the main character is a kid called Ponyboy Curtis, and yes, that is his real name. It's on his birth certificate and everything.
He's even got a brother named Soda Pop.
It's these three brothers, Ponyboy played by C. Thomas Howell, Soda Pop played by Rob Lowe, and Darry, the oldest brother, played by Patrick Swayze. And basically, they all live together in this house. Soda has a job as like a mechanic somewhere, but it's really Darry who's the one who's really bringing home the bread, and it's all come about as a result of their parents dying in, I think, an auto accident. It usually is an auto accident.
Of course, we have Ralph Macchio as Johnny, one of the leads. And he this is pre-Karate Kid Ralph Macchio. He hadn't really had his big break yet, so he would have been 22 years old when they were making this film, or 23 maybe at most. Okay. And he definitely looks like a 14 or 15-year-old in this movie.
Well, he's meant to be 16, yeah. So like I wouldn't have thought that he was even in his 20s in this film. I mean, C. Thomas Howell certainly looks like he's about fucking 12 in this film. I don't know how old he was.
And that more or less rounds out the main cast. I liked that they went out of their way to include a couple of side characters from the novel who aren't really part of the plot, but they're there as part of flavoring. They included characters under the name of Tim Shepard, played by Glenn Withrow. And in the novel, Tim Shepard's a bit more of a presence than he is in the novel. He's like more of a hardcore criminal level greaser.
One of the things that I really liked about his inclusion was that they took a little side story from the book where like the whole point is like the Curtis household is just kind of, it's just got its door open, so people will often just wander in and just kind of hang out. And so, and one of the stories is that the Curtis boys wake up one day to find Tim Shepard just sitting in on the couch in the living room reading the newspaper, and they offer him breakfast, and he's like, "Nah, it's cool," and then he just leaves, and that's what happens in the film. I just like the fact that they included
Yeah,
that.
that was definitely one of the shots that they included in the director's cut. A couple more words on him, because he's an interesting character. Because S.E. Hinton, a lot of people probably aren't aware of this, but S.E. Hinton's novels, her young adult novels, I should say, Rumblefish, The Outsiders, and That Was Then, This Is Now, they all take place in 1965, 1966 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the same universe. And characters will make reference to characters in other books and things that they've heard happening. And in That Was Then, This Is Now, Tim Shepard and his brother, I believe it's Curly, are like
Curly
main
Shepard.
characters in the story. Yeah. And then when they made the there's actually a very, very little known sequel television series to The Outsiders.
Yes.
That was on Fox, that picks up exactly where the movie ends. Tim Shepard basically joins the Greasers as a replacement for Dallas.
I would argue that S.E. Hinton was probably a pioneer in the, I guess, the novel or and cinematic universe well before Quentin Tarantino or Marvel got hopped on.
It's definitely got shades of that to it, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And I remember when I sat down to watch this movie a couple of weeks ago. I normally take notes when we do these things, and I remember I looked at my notes the following morning, and the first thing I wrote under The Outsiders was "shit sucked," which I believe I wrote because the film does a really good job in its early scenes of just sort of showing you what it's like to be one step up from white trash in 1960s middle America.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, basically the first thing that happens is that Ponyboy gets accosted by a bunch of what are called the socias, who are just kind of sort of upper middle class sort of people. I mean, it's all very much about that kind of social factionalism. S.E. Hinton even said it at one point. It was basically she'd gotten tired of that kind of thing, and this is the whole kind of crux of this story. So, like, these social guys, like, they show up and they beat the shit out of Ponyboy. They even pull a switchblade out on him, and then thankfully his brothers and his mates show up to chase them off.
It introduces you to the characters and introduces you to their daily sort of dynamic. The Ponyboy's story as he embarks upon a fateful Friday night where he goes out with his buddy Johnny, who's pretty tight within the gang because they're approximately the same age, and they decide to go to a drive-in movie.
So they show up at this drive-in and they end up talking to a couple of Soch girls, one of which is Cherry Valance, played by Diane Lane. Fun little fact about this scene, I have so many fun facts about this movie now. The shot where Matt Dillon falls off his chair and everyone starts laughing at him, that wasn't actually scripted. Matt Dillon just fell off the chair.
This is sort of the scene where Ponyboy explains to Cherry a lot of the dynamics, that they deal with being greasers and how they have to sort of watch their backs from the socias and how the world doesn't do them any favors and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And she responds back, life isn't all sunshine and roses for them either. Things are tough all over, which, is a good way of looking at things, particularly when you're a teenager. The world seems pretty, you have pretty narrow horizons, right, outside of your own immediate experience. They enjoy this dumb beach movie, as Ponyboy calls it, that doesn't really have a plot. Anyways, they finish up the movie. They decide to walk these girls home, and along the way, they run into Tubit. Emilio Estevez is walking around being comically drunk. Anyways, long story short, after they've all gotten to know each other, they decide to walk the girls home. and they're trailed by the Socs, who were their dates earlier. And this is where things get ugly. They get out of the car, man, that the girls get back in. One of my favorite lines in the movie is when the Socs says, "Hey, buddy, there's two more of us in the back seat." Two Bit just smashes a bottle, turns it around, hands it to Johnny in one quick motion, pulls out a switchblade from his own pocket, and says, "Then pity the back seat." And that was just a perfectly executed character moment.
Ponyboy and Johnny end up kind of falling asleep in a vacant lot somewhere. Pony shows up back at home. He has an argument with his older brother, who kind of ends up shoving him to the floor, and he automatically regrets it afterwards. Pony runs away with Johnny, and the pivotal moment of the film happens where they end up being accosted by those same Socs again in the middle of a public park. They're encroaching on the greaser's territory, but Bob, the main social character here, does not give a single shit because he's drunk as hell. And so they end up trying to drown Ponyboy in a fountain.
As one does.
As one does. And Ralph Macchio, being the fucking Karate Kid, now an armed Karate Kid because he's got a fucking switchblade on him, decides to go up and stab Bob to death. And it's a pretty brutal scene, actually, for what is essentially an adaptation of a young adult novel. You see the scene of with Bob lying dead in the background, with the blood it's like a massive pool of blood.
All of the other Socs run, and Ponyboy and Johnny are panicking. So they, instead of going home or going to the police or whatever, they go to a country music bar where Dally is hanging out late at night, and end up in an upstairs bedroom with him, where he's sends them out of town. He gives them some money. He gives them a gun for, great idea. Give your 14 and 16-year-old friends a gun. What's the what are they going to possibly need that for? In a situation they're in.
I love how cool Dallas is with this whole thing. Like they show up at the door of this place. They're crying. They're not looking great at all. Fucking Ponyboy looks like a drowned rat. They're like, "Yeah, I just killed somebody," and Dallas like, "Okay, here's a gun and some money. Go to this church somewhere. I'll come and get you in a little while. Jeez, whatever."
So he sends them to the countryside, and they make their way to this abandoned church in the middle of I guess it would be like rural Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Where, they proceed to hide out and have some good old-fashioned male bonding time.
If by male bonding time you mean changing their appearances so that, the cops can't get a good look at them. What I love about that is that, like, Johnny uses a fucking switchblade to really roughly cut Ponyboy's hair, and then he bleaches his hair blonde, so he ends up looking like a character in a Mormon cartoon.
I like how Johnny's the one who actually killed a guy and is the person of interest to the police, if anybody. But it's Ponyboy who has to cut his hair.
Yeah,
dye it blonde with peroxide.
Yeah, Johnny doesn't. Yeah, Johnny barely changes his appearance at all. But what's great is like, you see him do it in such a rough manner, and you think, oh god, that's going to look terrible. But then you see them afterwards, and their hair looks great. Like it's perfectly styled and everything.
So they subsist in this church for a week. I believe it's a week, on a diet of bologna sandwiches and cigarettes.
Yeah, typical 1960s diet,
while reading Gone with the Wind.
I want to point out as well, I love kind of how realistic this is, because like I think this is probably how it would pan out if you got like a pair of teenage boys, like one of them commits a serious crime, they go off and hide out in like a church or something like that for 5 days, and then eventually they just go, you know what, we're just gonna turn ourselves in.
Exactly. Which is exactly what happens when Dally finally comes to collect them. He's not happy. He brings him a letter from home. He takes him to. He's like, no, don't stick your noses out the door when you get there till I come to get you. He comes to get them, takes them to fucking Dairy Queen
I
in
know.
public.
Well, 5 days have
Keeps
passed. 5 days have passed. It's cool.
keeps the gun out on the dashboard of the car. So when a little girl comes over asking for 15 cents to buy some ice cream, that's Sofia Coppola, by the way,
Oh,
who comes
really? I
over.
didn't realize. No.
Yeah, that's Francis Ford's daughter. He ends up screaming at the little girl to get out of there while he tries to panicky hide the gun in the car. I mean, little moments like that are what really make this film, right? Because these are not sophisticated
No.
career criminal types. These are dumb kids.
Dallas is the closest thing to a sophisticated career criminal here, and he's waving a gun around in the middle of a fucking Dairy Queen parking lot.
So, after a week of eating fried bologna sandwiches, or not fried, just plain bologna sandwiches, and not practicing good fire safety with their cigarette butts, Dally comes to collect them. They decide they want to turn themselves in, and they go back to the church. I'm not sure why. Why did they go back to the church in the first place? Is it mentioned in the novel?
I can't remember. I think it's probably just to get some stuff that they had there. Maybe their copy of Gone with the Wind, which is very integral to their characters and whatnot at this point. When they see the church, like, up in flames, and apparently a bunch of small children, hidden away inside the church. I mean, how this happened, I have no fucking idea.
I believe in the book. It's mentioned that there's like a school field trip to the countryside or whatever, and the teachers just let the kids play in the church. As one does.
As one does.
I remember on school field trips having no, particularly when I was like a toddler, 5 years old, 6 years old, whatever, having no supervision from my teachers whatsoever, being allowed to play in abandoned buildings.
Oh, God bless 1960s America, dude. God, I was born in the wrong time.
They rush in to rescue the kids. Ponyboy gets inside, but they manage to pull all the kids out and sort of toss them out the window to safety. Dally runs up in a moment of heroism to rescue Johnny and Ponyboy. He pulls Ponyboy out, but a burning beam falls on Johnny's back, and Dally jumps inside to rescue him, and that's when we pan back and the church just collapses, and it cuts to Ponyboy chain smoking in a hospital waiting room. Boy, those were the days.
Again,
they don't let you do. Trust me, they don't let you do that no more.
Patrick Swayze, Darry, and Rob Lowe as Soda Pop show up, and they of course have a bit of a tender moment, and it's in these moments I mean, you can write off people like Rob Lowe and Patrick Swayze as being like pretty boys, especially of their time and everything, and yeah, they are, but it's moments like these where like they really do show off their acting chops, but especially Patrick Swayze. He's really good in this movie. I mean, they're all really good in this movie.
They head back to Tulsa, and of course, Johnny's hospitalized. He's not doing good.
No.
He's got massive burns and a broken back. Dally is also hurt, but he'll be okay. Daryl puts Two-Bit in charge of Ponyboy for the day. And he gives the iconic line, "Ponyboy, if you smoke more than a pack today, I'm gonna skin you."
Yeah, I think Ponyboy says something in kind.
Some half-hearted jibe about if you carry more than one bundle of roofing today, me and Soda here will skin you.
Yeah,
it doesn't really hit as hard, Pony. I'm sorry.
No, not quite. Not quite. I mean, apart from anything else, you look about fucking 12. You've got arms like pipe cleaners. You're not skinning anyone alive.
In the aftermath of Bob being shanked by Johnny, the tensions between the creatures and Soches have reached a boiling point, and they've decided to resolve their differences. Their differences. With a final battle in the form of a abandoned lot rumble at like midnight or something, and they work it all out so that there's no weapons, there's no dirty fighting.
They're gonna go and beat the living shit out of each other, but there's rules, there's a code to follow here.
They meet up with Cherry Valance, who's been acting as a spy. They refer to her as. I'm not I'm not sure what kind of spying she's been doing. There's a bunch of high school kids. She sort of gives a bit more exposition about how things are tough all over,
They talk
and
about they talk about how they both see the same sunset from different parts of town and everything. It's all very
yeah,
it's all very hippie type stuff.
yeah, it's all very young adult. And then they go and they visit Johnny in the hospital. The nurse is played by S.E. Hinton.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize it was her until I was doing a bit of research afterward.
Johnny looks worse than the critical drinker on the day after St. Patrick's. He's lying in this gurney, facing down. I guess because he can't lie on his back. Massive burns all over him. Apparently, he's broke his back. He's going to be in a wheelchair. So no more rumbling for Johnny Boy. He tells them, "Oh, it's all useless. Don't bother with this rumble. It's all futile. This general message keeps getting hammered in. Their lifestyle it bears no real fruit."
No,
Then they go see John. Then they go see Dally in the next door room. He's a lot more enthusiastic about the fight. He gives another great line where he's like, "We got to do it for Johnny, man.
for Johnny.
We got to do it for Johnny."
And so we get to the big rumble, and again, I love the way that they lead up to the rumble. It's like they're bouncing out the doorway. It's like they're gonna go. It's like they're going to camp or something. They're gonna go make a raft, and they're gonna go rafting. They're gonna go climbing or whatever. But
they almost dance away from the dinner table. On a whim to go to this fight,
Yeah.
And they're hooping and hollering.
Even Darry, who's meant to be the responsible adult here, he's meant to be like 20 in the context of the story. Even he's like, "Yeah, let's do this."
Some great cinematography here.
Oh yeah, definitely. Francis Ford Coppola said that this was probably the scene, like his favorite scene in the movie, and it was largely because it was so difficult to do. I think it actually did start pissing down with rain at one point while they were filming, and instead of just like leaving it, Coppola was like, "Yeah, okay, we'll just make it so that it's raining."
It's so effective.
Oh
it's
yeah,
so effective.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so like everything is dirty. Like everyone is just like they're rolling around in the mud. It's way more visceral and way more impactful than it is in the book. So sorry, SE. Yeah, this was better.
In the books, I believe that Ponyboy just sort of like blacks out almost. He doesn't really experience a lot of the fight.
Yeah, well, I mean, he gets his ass kicked in the fight when you see it in the movie. So I can see why he blacks out.
Anyways, at the Rumble, they meet up with a couple of the other greaser crews, including the one led by Tim Shepard. Tim Shepard sort of gives him props for stabbing a Soch in the first place.
Yeah, you know what?
Doesn't really know what to make of that.
During Dowie's time in the hospital, Tim Shepard actually shows up at the hospital to visit Dowie, and this is the interesting thing is the way that the dynamics between these people is like early in the film, Tim Shepard's trying to hunt down Dowie to kick his ass because Dowie apparently slashed his tires, but also here they are like buddying it up together, like the dude's visiting him in hospital, which is it kind of plays into a lot of the sort of the commentary and portrayal of like masculine relationships, which I'm sure we'll get into later. They beat the living shit out of the Soches. The Soches run off with their tails between their legs, and Pony and Dowie all rush off to the hospital to tell Johnny. It's like, "Yeah, we beat them Soches. We beat them." And Johnny is, he's pretty bad. He ends up like giving Pony like the copy of Gone with the Wind that they had, and then he tells him to stay gold, and then he dies.
As one does.
Yes, and of course that's in reference to like I think what was it? Was it a Robert Frost?
Robert Frost. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about some snow, man?
We discussed this, and I said no.
You're gonna have to edit that. You're gonna have to edit that.
No. It's not a movie pill unless there's at least one Simpsons reference.
Dally just snaps,
Yeah.
and he goes on. Runs out of the hospital. He goes to a convenience store where he just starts messing with the shopkeeper, and he just throws a gun into the guy's face, robs him for the pitiful contents of the till, and then engages in a desperate chase through the midnight streets of Tulsa. Everyone is able to make it to a dark but misty park, similar to the park at the beginning of the movie where Bob is killed, actually. And in another great scene of cinematography, Dali's like rolling through the park at a distance. He pulls the gun out, points it at the cops, and he commits suicide by cop when
Yeah,
they gun him.
I mean that's something you gotta sort of mention about this film. Is just that like it looks great. It's much more stylish than I remember it being, and the scenes like that with the cinematography just exemplify it. Ponyboy. He's got to work on like a sort of project for like I think it's his English class or something, and he ends up writing the first lines of the movie and what were of the book. And
Ponyboy Curtis is S.E. Hinton confirmed.
yes, S.E. Hinton is basically a 12-year-old greaser boy confirmed.
We're sorry, Essie. If you're listening to this, you've written some fantastic stuff, and it's all said with love.
Oh yeah, I mean, I really like the book. I really like this movie. The fact that it is written by a woman, I think, does kind of give it a sort of more empathetic or compassionate edge that you probably wouldn't get otherwise. You just wouldn't see, and I know I say this a lot in this show, but you wouldn't see this kind of book written by a woman in the way that it is written here. It doesn't shame the boys for being what they are. It doesn't shame them. It has an empathetic outlook towards it, and it does portray. I think what it does is it portrays both the negative aspects of masculinity and the positives. It's quite empathetic in a way that I don't think you would see many female authors doing with male characters nowadays.
The older boys coming to the defense of Ponyboy, even with they don't really like him that much. Some of them.
Yeah, some of them are not that big on Pony, but they come along and they help him anyway because it's like, well, you're one of our own. We ought to help you.
If they were to remake The Outsiders, and God help us if they do.
Oh, good Lord.
I can only imagine the casting. I don't even want to think about it. But beyond that, like, there would be a message inserted into the film that masculinity, about toxic masculinity, as some people call it.
Oh, they probably would be.
And
yeah.
there would not be that empathetic tone.
No, it would be
taken to the plot characters.
It would be a scolding schoolmarm's tone about it. It would be scolding them for being what they are and everything. And I mean, look, the story already has a feminine outlook in the fact that it was written by a woman, and there's also the character of Cherry Valance, who is the first one to really kind of point out that all this fighting amongst our respective groups is ridiculous. It's all it's ultimately about the individual, and I think that's another part of this story that is quite prominent thematically, is that you might be born into a situation, you might be born into like a social caste, like your lower working class sort of greasers versus your upper middle class kind of socias and everything. But that's not all you are. You can rise above it, and in fact, that's a big thing with Dary's character. At one point, again, this isn't brought up as much in the movie as it is in the book, but there's a scene where Two-Bit, Emilio Estevez's character, points out that Dary could have been a socia if he wanted to. He could have put Ponyboy in a home and continued working his way through college after their parents died. But he didn't, and so that's why he's kind of so harsh on Ponyboy, because Ponyboy is kind of a smart kid, And Darry knows that if Pony puts his mind to it, he could actually get out of the situation that they're in, and that's why he's so goddamn harsh on him all the time. And so there's that element of it as well. That it's about the individual. It's moving past like your kind of your social cast.
Oh, this movie comes with its own Stevie Wonder song for some reason.
Oh yes, it does. I didn't remember that. That was another thing I totally forgot about. Like we start watching the film and there's fucking Stevie Wonder singing "Stay Gold."
So it's a nice touch. It gives the movie a bit of sappy gravitas almost.
Yeah, the song was actually it was done by Stevie Wonder and Carmine Coppola, who is Francis Ford Coppola's father, actually.
You know, if you haven't seen it, check it out. If you haven't read the book, pick it up. It's a quick read. It's less than 200 pages. You can get through it in an afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'll say this as well. It's surprisingly dense, sort of character, theme, and story-wise for being such a short book as well. You can get through it fairly quickly, but there's a lot there.
Definitely, yeah. It does a great job at the world building and fleshing out most of the characters, and it sort of hints at a bigger universe, not universe, but a bigger setting that these characters exist in, which the author expanded on by drafting other novels and sort of tying them in a peripheral way to the Tulsa cinematic universe, such as it is, or the Tulsa literary universe.
Yeah.
There's a lot here to like.
I like how this is sort of turned into almost a novel pill as well as a movie pill at this point. We might end up...
people need to read more.
Yeah, I think they should read more, especially the classics like this one. I think this book and this movie does have like a lot of good positive messages in it. It's also and like I said, it's a very empathetic movie when it comes to like young men, particularly like sort of rough and dirty young men who for whom say like a bit of violence is a fairly common thing for them and everything. Whilst like we said, a lot of writers nowadays would probably try to turn it into some kind of screed against toxic masculinity or the inability of men to show their feelings or whatnot. I think this story shows that there's nothing wrong with you being a man, but at the same time, you can look at a sunset every now and then.
And you can be smart about it. Like, don't stab somebody in a park in the middle of the night unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah, it's only if you absolutely have to. And also, don't rob a fucking convenience store. Jesus, I don't care if your friend just died of a broken back in the hospital. Don't do that.
Don't give a loaded gun to a 15-year-old fugitive.
You know what? If there's anything that you and I are good at, it's giving fictional characters good advice after they've done the stupid thing, of course. Post hoc good advice.
They never listen, do they?
No, never do. But anyways, this has been The Outsiders. It's a really great film. I'm not sure if I would put it up as like to the same level as, say, The Godfather. I love The Godfather. It's one of my favorites. But it's a Coppola film. I think especially having like learned about the ways that like he makes his movies, particularly on this movie and everything. I think the man's a genius. And if you look at some of the stuff regarding like when they did a newer cut of the film, which added in a bunch of extra stuff that was originally cut from the film, Coppola actually flew a lot of the main cast out, like Patrick Swayze, Ralph Macchio, C. Thomas Howell, and Diane Lane, flew them all out for like a little screening of it. And when you watch the footage of them watching it together, and I don't know, it gave me kind of a warm and fuzzy feeling. I think it's really cool the way that they all kind of are just kind of sitting around that big dinner table talking to each other about the movie, and having almost be like a family like that. I mean, how many movies made nowadays could you say the makers have that kind of relationship? I somehow not many. I don't think.
I don't think I can think of a single one. Most movies these days are made by committee. They bring the director in. It's more of an employer-employee relationship. You know what I mean? It's a product of a classic style of filmmaking that no longer exists on the big budget level.
And it's also the product of Francis Ford Coppola having a rule where he has to do things that children ask him to do.
Bless that man's heart.
Yeah, bless his heart,
Right.
bless his beard. You know.
All right. You want to call it?
Yeah. So, anyways, this has been yet another fantastic episode. If I do say so myself, of the Movie Pill. I've been your host, the indestructible DeadEye, and this has been my co-host, the murderous Mr. Molotov. Say bye to the people.
Stay gold, everybody. And if you smoke more than a peck today, I'm gonna skin you.
And may you ride the night to the morning sun.